Hello and welcome to another bodgit and leggit video. Now we are finishing up, well closely finishing up with this little Fiesta. We're going to do a timing belt today, timing belt kit, which is important. In this kit you get a timing belt, you get the tensioner and a couple of new bolts. Now it's important to do the timing belt kit because the belt can fail, but also so can the tensioner. So if you just replace a belt, you can still have a problem with the tensioner. So we're going to replace it all. Now what I'm going to do first is, this is obviously the top of the engine, but before I go any further, I'm going to take the wheel off and the cover that protects the fan belt. So I'm going to do all that, and once I've got all that off, I'll turn the camera back on and we'll start stripping the top out, and then we'll do the bottom. Right, so as we can see, I've taken off the wheel and I've taken off this cover from underneath. There was just two 8mm bolts and two clips where a pipe went on it, so that's now off. We now come to the top. What we really need to do is we need to get everything so we can see it. So we need to take off the covers, the fan belt and everything. The covers down below, just so we can see the belt. Unfortunately, this particular engine, everything's very tight, so I'm going to struggle showing you everything, but I'll try and show as much as I can. So I'm going to take off the top cover, which is 3 8mm bolts. I just had to get the smaller 8mm because the long reach 8mm wouldn't fit in this little gap here, so hopefully this now will. There's just literally no room in this. Now it's loosened. I'll take it off of this. You can just see the ratchet just where it is. Once you're doing it, it will be fairly straightforward to see where the bolts are. I don't know how people manage without air tools. John, how do you manage without air tools back in the day? There's another one. It is right at the back. There's 4 on this. I'm not going to even attempt to be able to get that. So what I'm going to have to do first is, which I wasn't hoping I'd have to do straight away, is I'm going to have to take off this engine mount here so I can lift up the engine so I can get to these bolts. So we need to put the jack underneath with a bit of wood to support the sump, because if you just put the jack on the sump, you'll crush the sump. So we're going to put a piece of wood, rest it on the sump, and I'm going to undo these bolts here and we'll lift it up. Right, so I have the jack underneath, supported with a bit of wood on the sump. Now, it's a 15mm socket and there's 4 bolts on this engine mount. Now, it's a good thing to do is just to keep all the bolts together with as much as you can, because then at least you're not going to get confused where everything goes back. Hopefully now that should give me enough room, I'm hoping, to jack up the engine to get to this other bolt which is in here. Now that's as far as we can jack the engine, and unfortunately I don't think I've got enough room. Might have to try a spanner on that. I'm going to use one of these spanners, and hopefully the angle of the spanner will allow me, and it still won't. Maybe from this way. Right. The bolt feels damaged. Someone's obviously had a go at this one before. Fortunately, the bolt is damaged, so I'll have to maybe take off this expansion bottle here and maybe try and get to it that way. Now it looks like there's a Phillips screwdriver, Phillips screw even, down here. Now, move that out of the way. Now I might be able to get a ratchet on it. Seems to be tied in with the bottom cover, so I can't even take that off yet. So I have to lift this up now. We'll take off the fan belt, take off the bottom cover, and hopefully everything will come off together. Now, as we can see, this is the fan belt. It's going to be very difficult to get all, as you can see, it's just very, very tight. Before you take off the fan belt, what I suggest you do is either take a picture of it or quickly draw it out on a piece of paper, just so you know exactly where the belt goes. Because, it's not a big deal, but it can just save you a good few minutes if you get confused. But to actually take it off, all we need to do is get a 13mm socket. And as we can see, as I'm lifting it up, you can see the belt's getting loose. So it's very simple. Just release the tension, get it off one pulley first. Doesn't really matter which one you get it off. Just get it off one of them. The easiest one, which the problem is now you have to get a smaller ratchet. Easier to get a smaller ratchet on it. Right, well, I've left my ratchet up on the engine bay, but this T-bar with this 30mm will still do the same. So just release the tension, take it off whichever pulley is the easiest. Now, and that goes back, which unfortunately that's now stuck on it. We can take this down, out of our way, kind of. Now we can. There's just no room in this car for anything. There we go. Now this is kind of obvious, but when you're taking things like fan belts and stuff off, because you have to take it off, if it's any ways bad at all, just replace it. Now what we need to do, because these engines are a bit of a nightmare, there's a locking bolt right at the back here, you can't really see it, I can't even get the camera in, to lock the bottom crank. I personally don't like doing it that way, but you have to lock off the bottom crank before you take off. Well, actually, we can actually take this off. I didn't see that, which is good. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take off first. Can't see rightly. Everything's just in the way. I need to take off this bottom cover here, which is another 8mm bolt here. And I think there's another 8mm bolt further on up, but I just can't quite see, and there's no way I can get the camera in. So once I get the cover off, I will show you where the bolts go from the actual cover. So I'm going to do that, I'll turn the camera back on, and we'll go from there. Now, I was hoping this was going to be a lot easier to film than what it actually is. It's the first one I've done on the Fiestas. I've obviously done them on the Focuses and stuff, but this is the first one I've done on a Fiesta, and it's a lot tighter than I was expecting. Now, I've had to remove this top tensioner, or this top idler, which goes right here, to try and release the actual timer belt cover. But what I also have to do, I'm going to have to take off the alternator and the alternator bracket. Now again, I'm just not going to be able to film doing this. We've got a bolt here, we've got another bolt directly underneath there, you can just kind of see it. We have a bolt behind here, a couple of bolts there. I'm going to have to remove this. Then once we've done that, we have a 10mm bolt here and we have an 8mm bolt at the bottom. That should allow me to get the cover off so we can kind of see where we're going. I'm just not going to be able to film it because as soon as I put my hands there, it just blocks everything. So once I get it off, I will show you what it's like once it's off and where the bolts go. Now, as you can see, I've got the cover off and the engine mount. Absolute nightmare. That's where the engine mount sits. This is basically where it bolts into the starter motor, well, not the starter motor, but the alternator fits here, this side, and this is where it bolts onto the engine. Now, absolute nightmare, even to get the bolts out here. There's 2 bolts at the bottom, there's 1 bolt here, and this is the 4 bolts we originally took off in the first place. Now we can see the top of the timer belt a lot easier now, and in down here we've got the tensioner, and right below we've got the bottom pulley. There is a new type tensioner on this. Now this is the first time I've come across a tensioner that's different to the one that's in it. Normally they're exactly the same, but apparently these work. The one that's in it, this bolt is elongated here, and there's an Allen key place here where you can actually tension it yourself. But this one, apparently, you bolt it in place, you pull this pin, and it automatically does absolutely everything for you. Now, it obviously works. It is a Gates belt kit, so it's a good quality kit. It's just I've never come across it before, and it's a little bit kind of scary because I'm just not used to it. I prefer it the way I know, but anyway, it obviously works. So what I have to do now is, you do have to lock the 2 top cams with a special bar and take off the rocker cover, but I'm not going to do it that way. And also you need to lock the bottom crank with a special locking pin. I have the locking pins, I just don't like them, so I'm going to do it a slightly different way. I'm going to show you the way I'm going to do it, and then you know, you should be able to do it yourselves that way. Very simple. You can see there is marks on this where someone's done it before, because the belt has been changed. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get all this lined up first before I go any further. Now, like I've done a few videos on these Fords, on these keyways, and basically how you can't, there's no keyway in the main crank, so you have to lock it. The special Ford locking kit is very, very cheap. It really is. You can get them for like 30, 40 quid. They're not expensive. I just don't like using them. I just don't like the way you have to put the bolt through the crank and let it rest on the crank. It doesn't hold the crank, it rests on it. I don't like it. What I like to do is wedge the actual flywheel. So I've got the flywheel here. You can just barely see it where the screwdriver is. You can just see the teeth sticking out. So I'm going to wedge this screwdriver in the crank to stop the crank turning, but not only that, I'm going to mark it with Tipp-Ex. Tipp-Ex is going to be your best friend when you're doing a timing belt. So what I need to do is I need to mark the crank and mark the gearbox. Hopefully I'm not getting in the way of this. Now hopefully that you can kind of see that. I've marked the gearbox and I've marked the crank. Not the crank, the actual flywheel. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to wedge this screwdriver in here, which will lock it on top of me marking it. Now, it might look a little bit dodgy, but believe me, it works. If for some reason that screwdriver does pop out, we have the top Tipp-Ex mark, so we're kind of okay. But that will hold the bottom crank in place for us now. So we'll get to do everything else now in a second. I'm just going to get this thing out of my eye. Now we've locked the bottom crank in place, we need to do the same with the top. So what I need to do is mark the two top pulleys. Same again with these. Now, the correct tool for this is a special locking bar. When you take off the rocker cover, there's a special locking bar goes between the two. I'm not going to use that. I'm going to use this gadget here. This is a special gadget which basically locks any cams together, any two twin cam together. And also there's another tool then for the single cam. Hopefully you can kind of see what I'm doing. Now, that is basically locked the two cams together. Even if this falls off or anything like that, we still have the two original marks. So always best to double mark everything. Even if you lock it, always mark it in case anything ever happens here. You've always still got the proper marks on the top. Now what we're going to do is remove the bottom pulley, and then we should be good to replace the belt. So once we know we've got everything locked in place, whip this off with the air gun. Oh. You see, no keyway, no nothing in here. Now there's two more 8mm bolts to take off the bottom. So now that comes off. So what we need to do now is go and make sure our top marks haven't moved, and then we can undo the actual tensioner on the belt. Now as we can see, it might look like it, but I've just got the camera at a weird angle, but them top marks haven't moved. It just depends which way I'm holding the camera up by its legs, but so they haven't moved. So what we're going to do now, we're going to lift it back up and we're going to loosen the tensioner, and then we can actually get the belt off. So all I'm going to do now is loosen these two bolts here. Now they look like 13mm bolts, but again I'm getting in the way of it, unfortunately, so I'm not going to be able to film it. But these two bolts here are the bolts on the old tensioner. Once I've loosened that, the belt should just literally fall off. So as you can see, we've got the tensioner off. Like I said, this is a different tensioner to what's going back on it, but well, it's going to work, but I'm just not used to it, like I said before. This is the bottom pulley. As you can see, it just moves. That's why you kind of get that, so don't worry about that. The time belt is off. We just need to disconnect it from the top now, so we need to bring it back down and do it from the top. Right, so we haven't moved on our top marks, but to be fair, even if we did on our top marks, it's not the end of the world because we had the marks. Even if this little gadget fell out, we still have a mark. It's the bottom one with the no keyway you have to be careful of. But the top two, not really a big issue. It's just this is going to help me for tightening it with this being in the way. Now this is the old timing belt, and hopefully it's coming through on camera, but as you can see, there's a lot of little hairline cracks that there wasn't long left to go in that one. And the new tensioner, like I said before, it's the same size, but there's no little adjusting Allen key here, and there's no elongated slot in the top. So apparently what you do with this one is you just put it in, pull the pin, and don't worry about it.
Run away.
Yeah. Run away is right. So what we're going to do is basically that. So I have two nuts again, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the belt on the top first and kind of do everything from underneath, because it's just easier on this particular car. But what you do have to bear in mind on this particular setup, it's telling me to keep the tension taut between the cam and the bottom crank, which you have to do anyway. But obviously with this slightly new design of a tensioner, it might just need slightly different. So we're going to now lift it up, put this in, and see what happens. Right, this is a very awkward video because I just can't get to everything, and I'm just not happy. It's just been an awkward timing belt to do. But basically, as you can see, we're on. Now we've still got the locking pin in, as you can see from the tensioner. We're lined up with the two top marks, and we're lined up with the bottom marks. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to lift it up. I'm going to tighten the two tension bolts and pull out that pin, and technically as I pull out that pin, everything should tighten up. So all this slack and everything, and it should tighten up, and it should be its own tension. That's what it says in the little booklet, and that's what it says about this new tensioner. It's a new tensioner they've designed, so we just have to kind of wait and see. Well, I say new, it could be 3 or 4 years old, I don't know. I've never done a timing belt on one of these. It just says new design of a tensioner. So let's lift it back up now, tighten the two 13mm bolts, pop that pin, and see what happens. Right, so this is the bottom of the engine. As you can see, this is the bottom crank. That's my little gadget there, you can just see the colour of it, and this is the pin. Now we've tightened these two bolts here, the two 13mm bolts. So all I should have to do now is pull out that pin, and it should do everything for me, theoretically. So, again, let's see what happens. Now, I don't know if you saw that, but that all moved. So that's all nice and tight. I'm just going to check the top pulleys to make sure they haven't moved. The bottom crank marks, they haven't moved. I've also wedged an extra screwdriver in there just to be on the safe side. So, providing they haven't moved on the top, we should be all right. Hokey cokey, as we can see, the top marks are all lined up, the bottom marks are still lined up. It's nice and torqued even, so it's, you know, it all seems to be good. Obviously they've done a lot of testing, they haven't just banged these out and said here, try them. It's just, obviously I'm not used to it, but to be fair to it, I have to say I like it again now, because it seems to have done everything that it's supposed to do. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to lift it up, I'm going to put the bottom pulley back on, as you can see right down there, before we take anything out. So we leave everything in, we put the bottom pulley wheel on, we tighten it up, and then we start taking bits out. Right, before we put the bottom cam on, we obviously have to put this little cover on. It is important, because if you don't do it, you will have to take the bottom cover off, the bottom pulley off again. So I need to put these little 8mm bolts in. Now, before I actually put this on, in the new time belt kit, you get 2 new bolts, and these are for the bottom pulley. You've got them, so you might as well use them. There's 2 different bolts, so there must be 2 different types of bolts, and obviously, as you can see, we have the smaller one out of the 2. So I'm going to put the new bolt on. Now, you don't have to put Loctite on this, because if you did, there would already be Loctite on this, and these go very tight anyway, so there's no need for it. Now again, this is where you have to be careful, because we don't need this to move. Now obviously it's going to move now because it's not tight. But once I start tightening this with the air gun, I'm going to have to check my marks, because everything is locked into place. If things start moving, I can start doing damage. I could maybe damage my little gadget tool up there, or I could even damage the engine. So we have to be careful in the way we do it. But again, the air gun kind of saves you a lot of that. Now, that might not seem like it's very tight, but believe me, it's a very powerful air gun, and that is nice and tight. What we can do now is we can take all our pins out, So we can take the screwdrivers out, we've locked the bottom, I can take my little gadget out the top, and we can then physically twist this thing round a couple of times to see if it locks. If it doesn't lock, we can start it. Now, there's a few things that can happen. Even if it doesn't lock, you could still maybe have slipped your timing. But as long as the engine doesn't lock, you won't do any damage. The car might not start, it might start very rough, and it might start smoking, but at least you haven't done any damage. If you try and start this without turning it at first, well then good luck to you, you could do serious damage. So it's vitally important to turn it at least 3 or 4 times, full revolutions, to make sure it doesn't lock. And like I said, even if you have managed to slip your timing and it doesn't lock, you won't do any damage, so don't worry about it. So what we're going to do now is we're going to pull out all these pins and then we're going to turn it by hand. Right, this was the little gadget I was using to lock the 2 cams. I'll just kind of show you in a bit more detail now. It's fully adjustable, as you can see, so this all moves in and out. There is a longer bar if the cams are further apart. This then, as you can see, again moves in and out, same as this bottom one. So there's a hell of a lot of adjustment and it will lock any 2 cams together. Right, so what I'm going to do now is, now I know I've got everything in line, I'm going to try and turn this by hand. I'm only putting these marks here so I know myself when I've done a full revolution. So I'm just going to put marks underneath here. These aren't timing marks, these are just marks for me so I know that it's gone round, or how many times it's gone round. So this is now going to be a good test. So what we're looking for, we're looking for compression and obviously everything moving together and it doesn't stop moving, so it doesn't lock. Now there's compression there, as you can see, so you can see that it's fighting me. It's a good sign. So the bottom one's gone around once, that means the top would have gone around half that. That there now is 1 full revolution. So I'm just going to check, and to be fair, everything seems good. So again, I'm just going to go around again, just to make sure that nothing locks. I'm getting compression, which is good. Right, well there we go. So the engine will turn, it's not locking, so there should be no reason why we can't start it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get the jack and the piece of wood underneath it again, because I haven't put the fan belt or anything on, I haven't even put the cover on. I'm going to start it before I put anything like that on, just to see if it does start, see if it makes any noise. There's no point putting all the covers back on, putting the fan belt back on, putting the engine mount back on, if you realise then you have a problem. So you need to start it as soon as you possibly can to see if you've got a problem. Right everybody, this is kind of the butt clinching time, but to be fair, I like that style of tensioner now, because I was a bit unsure, but it's done what it's supposed to do. It's nice and tight. You need to make sure it's taut between the two top cams, and it's taut down here, so everything it's supposed to do is good. We've turned it, we know it doesn't lock, but let's see if it starts. Now, like I said, I've got nothing on here at the minute, so no engine mounts, nothing is back. The battery light will be on because there's no fan belt, so it won't charge the battery. We're just going to see if it will start and see if it doesn't make any noise and all that sort of stuff. So go for it. Hey! Yeah. Well, there you go. We can't really say fairer than that, can we? So that's it. All I've got to do is put everything back now. The joys. Oh. Right. So what I've got to do now is put this back. What I have done is I've just put this tensioner wheel back in here. I didn't need to take it off, but it's part of here. But it doesn't really matter that much. I've now got to get this slid down the engine. Again, I'm not going to be able to film it because you're just not going to be able to see it. But I've just got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 8mm bolts. This is the engine mount then, and this is where the alternator goes on. So it's just a bit fiddly. Everything hard to get past the power steering pulley. What I'm going to do is, again, like I said, you're not going to be able to see what I'm doing, but basically I'm going to put this on, put the bolts on. I'll turn the camera once I've got that on. Right, so we've managed to get this case back on. There's a couple of bolts here, 2 more bolts in behind the alternator, and a couple of the 8mm bolts. Like I said, there's just no way of me filming it, it was just too tight. But what I can do is put in the alternator back. Now we have 2 bolts, a big long bolt here first, which screws in, and then we have another bolt. But what we need to do, before we do anything, is get torque to screw this all the way in. Now we can actually screw the bolt that it belongs to. I think it was a 15. 15mm it is. Now you have to be careful because you are screwing into alley, so you don't want to go too hard. That air gun wasn't a powerful air gun, so I'm going to tighten these by hand. There's a lot more feel by hand than there is using air tools, but at least the air tools can get you in most of the way first. I'm going to wait for my compressor to turn off and we'll do the rest. Now again, because the way this little Fiesta is done, I can't film this, but this is the little pulley for the water pump. Now I had to take it off to get the timing cover off. It's just 4 little 10mm bolts, and it just slides on. It can be a bit difficult to line up the 4 holes, but again, I'm not going to be able to film it because as soon as I put my hand in the way, it blocks everything. Once I put this on, I can actually put the fan belt on. And once I get the fan belt on, I just got to put the engine mount on, and this is then completely done. The easiest and safest way to kind of do this is to get a big bar, be very gentle, and kind of lock the pulley, to put pressure on the pulley, and then you can tighten it with a spanner, ratchet, or whatever happens to be you need to do. So all I'm going to do is just wedge the pulley. I'm not going to push it hard, get my 10mm spanner and just tighten them. Now all that's on, we can actually put the fan belt on now. And then just put the engine mount on. This is where when you've took a picture of the belt, it makes your life a lot easier. Now again, I'm not going to be able to show you because there's just no room, but I have this handy little gadget here, basically splits in half, and what it's designed for is you can put this on any different angle, and this is designed, it's really thin as you can see, and this is designed to open tensioners or tighten tensioners for fan belts. It's nice and thin, you can get in anywhere. You put it on the bolt and get the right size nuts. It's a little ratchet, and as you can see, you might not be able to see properly. As you can see, that I'm tensioning that now by just pulling that, which makes my life a lot easier when I'm coming to putting it on the car. I have to get it around the right one first, and the one I'm actually leaving it off to make my life easier is the air conditioning one, because that's just the easiest way for me to do this. When I pull the tensioner, we can get it around. It's tight, but it will go on. And there we go. Now what I do is I just see if I can get John with the camera in here while I tension it and see if we... As you can see, when I pull this back, you can see the tensioner obviously loosening up, and that's what allowed me to put the belt on. So yeah, simple as that. Now all we need to do is put the engine mount on. Now, literally all we got left to put on is the engine mount, the wheel and the cover, and then we're done. But at least once we get the engine mount on, we can have this starting and, you know, just making sure everything is fine. So all I've done is I've lowered it down on the jack, and I'm just basically putting the engine down flat. Now what we need to do is we need to just pump up the jack a little bit. So just lift up the engine just a tad, there we go. Now, the engine is now flat. What you want to do is jack it up, let the engine meet the engine mount. You don't want to be screwing these screws down to lift up the engine, because you will strip the threads very, very quickly. So you want to make sure it's flat before you do anything. Then we just need to get the air gun, 15mm. Again, this is not the powerful air gun, so we're no problem. Now tighten them by hand. Now, what we should be able to do now is let the jack out. The engine is now supporting itself. Start it to make sure everything's fine. So I'm just going to double check that the belt is on. It's not going to hop off. So I'm going to start it now to make sure the battery light goes off, to make sure no engine light comes on, to make sure everything is fine. Now, all we've got left to do is put this on. We have a power steering pipe here, and we have two little 8mm bolts. So it doesn't really matter what you do first, but it might be easier to kind of put the little clips in first, maybe. Like that. Clips aren't great, but right, it's clipped in. And now try and line this up in place. I don't know, it's going to be easier. It doesn't seem to want to go in that way. So is it that way maybe? That's maybe why. Get it in the right way and it will go in. So two little 8mm bolts right at the top, which can be fiddly. There's one. Now we'll clip the pipes in the proper way. It would help. There we go. 1 and 2. Now, just the wheel now. Right, so that's it. Just tighten up this wheel and that's basically done. Hope it helps. Thumbs up and subscribe, and don't forget to get your hands dirty. See you for the next one.